"We'll put him out after Christmas dinner." Those words hit me like a fist to the chest. My own daughter-in-law Trina, standing right there at my dinner table, speaking those words like she was ordering groceries. Not whispering. Not hesitating. Just cold, calculated words that would change everything. I sat frozen, my fork suspended over a plate of Margaret's cranberry sauce, the same recipe she'd made for 43 years. The turkey was still warm. Mila, my granddaughter, was sitting beside me, her little hand clutching my arm like she could somehow protect me from what was happening. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Have you ever felt the exact moment when trust shatters? When someone you thought was family shows you their real face? That was my moment. That was the night everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed, became nothing but a burden to the people I loved most. My name is Harold Quinn. I'm 71 years old, and I've lived through a lot. I've seen 2 wars from a distance, buried my wife of 48 years, watched the world change in ways I never expected. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the sting of betrayal served on fine china with a smile that never reached her eyes. Let me back up. Just hours before this moment, I'd spent the entire day in my kitchen, cooking from my late wife Margaret's old notebooks. The ones she'd kept since we were married, back when we didn't have much but had everything that mattered. I'd made the turkey with sage butter just like she did. The stuffing with oysters, her secret ingredient. The cranberry sauce that took 3 hours to simmer down to perfection. The house smelled like her. Like Christmas. Like home. My son Evan had called earlier that week and insisted they all come over for Christmas Eve dinner. At first, Trina had resisted. I could hear it in her voice on the phone, that tight, controlled tone she used when she was irritated. But Evan had talked her into it. "It's Dad's tradition," he'd said. I heard those words secondhand, from Evan himself, and it made me smile. The smile didn't last long. They arrived around 6 o'clock. Trina was wearing a sparkly red dress that looked expensive. Evan looked distracted, the way he always did these days. And Mila, my little star, she came running to me with a card she'd made at school. A crooked Christmas tree in green crayon, with "I love you Grandpa Harold," scrawled across the top in her careful handwriting. That card is sitting in my desk drawer right now. I haven't been able to throw it away. Dinner started fine. We laughed. We clinked glasses. There were a few awkward silences, the kind that happen when people aren't being honest with each other. Evan kept looking at Trina like he was waiting for something bad to happen. I noticed it, but didn't say anything. Then, halfway through dessert, I caught Trina leaning over and whispering something sharp to Evan. He tried to shush her, but she pulled away and spoke louder. "We can't keep doing this, Evan. He's getting worse. The house needs too much work. We should have talked about this weeks ago." That's when I knew. That's when everything changed. The table went silent. Mila's fork clattered to the floor. My heart sank so far down I thought it might never come back up again. Little did they know, I was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. But first, I needed to listen to exactly what they were planning. Like this video if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you called family. Comment below. Your story matters. This house, this brick and mortar structure sitting on Elm Street in Maple Grove has more memories inside it than most families keep in a lifetime. Margaret and I built it together, back when building something with your own hands meant something. It was 1975. We had nothing but ambition and love, and we poured both into every room. I was a construction foreman back then. Worked 60-hour weeks, came home covered in sawdust and sweat. Margaret would have dinner ready, and we'd sit at the kitchen table, the same table that's still there, and talk about everything. Our dreams. Our fears. How many kids we wanted. What kind of life we were building. Evan was born 2 years after we finished the house. Margaret used to say that he was part of the walls, part of the foundation. That this place raised him just as much as we did. I remember the day he crashed his toy truck into the hallway wall. I was furious for about 5 seconds until Margaret laughed and said, "Well, now he's really left his mark on this place. That dent is still there." I look at it sometimes and see him as a 5-year-old, giggling like he'd done something brilliant. Everything changed when Margaret got sick. It was 5 years ago now, but it feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. The cancer came fast. Brutal. We fought it the way we fought everything. Together. But this was one battle we couldn't win. Before she passed, Margaret made me promise something. She grabbed my hand one night when the pain medication was wearing off, and she said, "Harold, you keep this place exactly as it is. Don't let anyone change it. Not for money, not for convenience, not for anything. This is us. This is our life." I promised her. And I meant it. After she died, things shifted. Evan and Trina started visiting more often at first. I was grateful for it. The silence in this house was suffocating. But Trina was different. She smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. She'd walk through the rooms like she was measuring them, calculating something in her head. One afternoon, about 2 years ago, I overheard her on the phone in the living room. She didn't know I was in the study next door. She was talking to someone about getting the house appraised. "It's a valuable property in a quiet town," she was saying. "Real estate is hot right now. Once Harold passes, when he decides to downsize, we should list it immediately." Once Harold passes. Like I was already dead. I sat there in the dark study, just listening. Listening to my daughter-in-law talk about my life like it was a transaction. Like Margaret's memories, our life together, meant nothing except dollar signs. That's when I knew something had to change. Evan, my son, is a good man. I know that. But he was weak with Trina. She had a way of making him do what she wanted, and he'd convince himself it was his idea. He started mentioning things casually. "Dad, this house is a lot to maintain. Have you thought about moving somewhere easier to manage? Somewhere with people your age." Translation: somewhere else. Somewhere away from here. The visits got shorter. The phone calls got less frequent. But the conversations about my future got more intense. They wanted me in a senior community. They wanted this house sold. They wanted me simplified, packaged up, and moved out of the way. What they didn't know was that I'd already made my move. I'd seen what was coming. And I had one card left to play. If you think family should respect their elders, type "respect" in the comments. Let's build this conversation together. The worst part about being betrayed by family is that you see it coming but you don't want to believe it. It's like watching a car accident in slow motion and hoping that maybe, just maybe, it won't happen the way you think it will. But it does. It always does. About 9 months before that Christmas Eve dinner, I'd made an appointment with Calvin Reyes. Calvin is my attorney, has been for 20 years. But more than that, he's like a second son to me. He knew Margaret. He's had dinner at this table more times than I can count. When I called him and said I needed to see him, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll make time." I sat in his office, a nice place on Main Street, all leather chairs and mahogany, and I laid it out for him. I told him about the trust I'd signed years ago. The one where I'd transferred everything into a family trust to simplify things when I died. I told him about the conversations I'd been overhearing. The measuring of rooms. The talk of selling. Calvin listened without interrupting. That's one of the things I've always liked about him. He doesn't waste your time with reactions. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Harold, you made a decision years ago from a place of love. But love doesn't always protect you from the people you love. Those words hit different back then. They hit harder now. So what do I do? I asked him. Calvin explained my options. And what he told me was simple but powerful. I didn't have to keep everything in that family trust. I could reclaim control. I could transfer the house back into my own name. And more than that, I could sell it. Not to Evan and Trina. Not to anyone they approved of. I could sell it to his investment group, and they would make sure I had a lifetime tenancy clause built into the sale agreement. That clause meant everything. It meant that no matter who owned the house, I could stay here until I died. Rent-free. Protected. Untouchable. But why would you sell it? I asked. Why not just keep it? Calvin smiled. Because, Harold, sometimes the best defense isn't holding on tighter. It's letting go on your own terms. We spent the next few months putting everything in place. Quietly. Carefully. We filed paperwork that nobody was watching for because nobody knew it was coming. We set up the sale. We made sure everything was legal and clean and binding. All the while, Evan and Trina kept pushing. Dad, have you thought about what we talked about? Trina would say, smiling that smile that didn't reach her eyes. We just want what's best for you. What was best for me was watching them think they were winning while I was actually one move ahead. Then came the summer. Trina started asking more direct questions. How much is your house worth? Have you thought about your will? Is everything organized? She was fishing, trying to figure out if there was a way to speed things up. I'd smile and change the subject. But inside, I was counting down the days. One afternoon in November, Evan called. Dad, Trina and I want to come over next week. We need to talk about something important. My stomach dropped. I thought maybe they'd figured out what I was doing. But then Evan's voice got softer, almost embarrassed. She wants to talk about moving you to a senior community. She thinks it's time. I almost laughed. Here they were, planning to take me out, and I was about to take them completely by surprise. Sure, I told him. Come over whenever you want. What I didn't tell him was that by the time Christmas came around, everything would be sold and signed. By the time they knocked on that door for Christmas Eve dinner, a sold sign would already be waiting in the wings. They didn't know what was coming. But I did. And I was ready. Would you stand up for yourself like Harold did? Or would you just accept it? Tell me in the comments. Christmas Eve came cold and clear. The kind of December day where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, but the air cuts right through you if you're not careful. I'd spent the entire day preparing, not just the food, but myself. Mentally, emotionally, because I knew what was about to happen. Trina had called the day before. We'll be there around 6, she'd said. Don't go overboard with the cooking, Harold. It's just dinner. Just dinner. Like she wasn't about to shatter what was left of my world. I'd gone overboard anyway. I always do when it comes to this house and the traditions we built here. I made the turkey with sage butter, the stuffing with oysters, the sweet potato casserole with the brown sugar topping, the cranberry sauce that took 3 hours to simmer down to that perfect consistency. I'd baked fresh rolls. I'd set the table with Margaret's good china, the plates she'd saved for special occasions, the ones she said we'd use when life felt worth celebrating. Today felt like it needed celebrating, in a way. Celebrating the life we'd had. Celebrating the woman who'd made this place a home. By 5:30, the house smelled like everything good. I'd turned on the fireplace. I'd put Christmas carols on the record player, Margaret's favorite album. The decorations I'd strung up were simple but warm. Lights in the windows. A wreath on the door. Holly and pine cones on the mantel. I was standing in the kitchen when they arrived. Evan came in first, stomping snow off his shoes, looking uncomfortable the way he always does when he knows something awkward is about to happen. He gave me a hug, but it was stiff, mechanical, like he was going through motions instead of actually being present. Trina swept in behind him in that red dress, the sparkly one that cost more than my first car. She had her hair done up fancy. She looked like she was going to a celebration, not a confrontation. Looking back, I think maybe she thought this was going to be easy. That I was just an old man who'd roll over and accept whatever they decided. She was wrong. Then Mila came through the door, and my heart just softened. She was holding a piece of paper, colored with crayons, creased from being in her backpack. She ran straight to me, wrapped her little arms around my legs, and looked up with those big eyes. "I made you something, Grandpa," she said. I picked her up and looked at what she'd drawn. A Christmas tree, crooked and imperfect, with little ornaments all over it in different colors. "I love you, Grandpa Harold," written across the bottom in her careful, childish handwriting. The letters weren't even straight, but they were beautiful to me. "This is perfect," I told her, and I meant it. I meant it with everything in me. Trina watched us with something in her expression I couldn't quite read. Impatience, maybe. Or calculation. Like she was timing something. Dinner went the way these dinners always go when there's tension underneath. We laughed, but it wasn't natural laughter. We clinked glasses and made toasts, but the words felt hollow. Evan kept looking at Trina like he was waiting for her to explode. Mila ate her turkey and asked for seconds. And I watched it all, knowing what was coming. Halfway through dessert, Trina couldn't hold it in anymore. She leaned over toward Evan and started whispering something sharp and fast. He tried to shush her, but she didn't care. She spoke louder, and suddenly the whole room went cold. "We can't keep doing this, Evan. He's getting worse. The house needs too much work. We should have talked about this weeks ago." The words landed like a slap. Evan's face went red. Mila's fork fell out of her hand and clattered to the floor. And I just sat there, staring at my daughter-in-law, feeling the moment when everything shifted. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Trina folded her napkin carefully before she answered. Too carefully. Like she'd practiced this moment. "Harold, we think it's time you moved into a senior home. You'll be cared for there, and it'll take a load off everyone. The house is just too big for you now. Evan and I have been managing everything, and it's just a lot." Evan stared down at his plate like it held the answers to questions nobody was asking. "After Christmas dinner, we'll put him out and finally list this place," Trina continued, her voice smooth as ice. "You're not getting any younger, Harold. Be reasonable." That's when I smiled. Not a happy smile. A knowing smile. The smile of someone who's been waiting for exactly this moment. I set down my fork. I looked at Mila, and she was looking at me with confusion and fear in those big eyes. I looked at Evan, ashamed and weak. And I looked at Trina, confident in her greed, thinking she'd already won. "You want to talk about reasonable?" I said quietly. "I've got something to show you all. After dinner." And that's when the game truly began. Comment below if you think Trina deserves what's coming. And tell me, what would you do in Harold's position? The drive to Calvin's office that night, after they left and the house went quiet, felt like I was floating. Like I wasn't quite connected to my body anymore. Everything was surreal. The cold air. The darkness outside. The weight of what I was about to set in motion. I'd called Calvin from the kitchen while Trina was in the bathroom. Just 2 words. Tomorrow. Do it. He'd understood immediately. We'd been planning this moment for months. All the paperwork was ready. All the signatures were in place. All I had to do was give him the signal, and everything would shift. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. This was really happening. I was really going through with it. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty. If maybe I was being too harsh. If maybe I should just take the easy way out and let them do what they wanted. Move into some retirement community. Let them sell the house. Let Margaret's memory get erased and turned into someone else's investment property. But then I thought about that card Mila had made. I thought about Margaret's voice, telling me to keep one key for myself. I thought about the promise I'd made at her bedside. And I knew I was doing the right thing. I called Evan around 9 in the morning. My voice was steady, calm, like nothing had happened. "Hey, son," I said. "I want to apologize for last night. It was awkward. I didn't handle it well. Can you and Trina come over tonight? For Christmas dinner? I want to show you something. A video. Something special." There was a pause. I could feel Evan trying to figure out if this was a trap. If I was going to go crazy on them. "Sure, Dad," he finally said. "We'll be there around 6. Perfect. By noon, Calvin called me. His voice was professional, but I could hear something underneath it. Respect, maybe. Or approval. "It's done," he said simply. "The sale is finalized. The deed is transferred. The sold sign goes up tomorrow morning. And Harold, the lifetime tenancy clause is locked in. You're protected. Nobody can touch this." I felt something release inside my chest. Something heavy that I'd been carrying for months. "Thank you, Calvin," I said. "You did what you had to do," he replied. "Don't apologize for protecting yourself." We hung up, and I sat in my recliner. Margaret's recliner, really, the one she used to curl up in with her coffee on Sunday mornings, and I just let it sink in. I was not the victim anymore. I was not the problem to be solved. I was not going to be erased from my own story. The house was officially sold. The paperwork was done. My name was on a lifetime tenancy agreement that no lawyer in the world could break. By tomorrow, there would be a sold sign on the lawn. By tomorrow, everything they'd been plotting would turn to dust. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Not food this time. I worked with Calvin on the video. We recorded him in his office, explaining the sale, explaining the lifetime tenancy clause, explaining that there was nothing Evan or Trina could do about it. Then we set it up to play right after dinner. Right when they were comfortable. Right when they thought they were safe to celebrate their victory. Around 4 o'clock, I started cooking again. But this time it wasn't about Margaret's memory or keeping traditions alive. This time it was about setting a stage. It was about making sure they were relaxed and happy and unsuspecting when the world shifted beneath their feet. I made a simple dinner. Turkey sandwiches. Soup. Nothing fancy. Just something to eat before the real show began. Mila had been on my mind all day. I hated what I was about to do to her. I hated that she'd be caught in the middle. But I also knew that someday, when she was older, she'd understand. She'd understand that you can't let people take advantage of you, no matter who they are. That dignity matters. That standing up for yourself is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. When they arrived that evening, they had no idea. They came in smiling. Trina was already planning how she'd tell me about senior communities. Evan was already stressed about having to convince me to go along with it. And Mila just wanted to spend time with her grandfather. I hugged them all and showed them inside. "Thank you for coming," I said, meaning every word. "I want to show you something special tonight. Margaret's old Christmas video. I thought we could all watch it together." Trina's face fell just slightly. Like she'd hoped we wouldn't dwell on Margaret. like the past was an inconvenience. But she smiled anyway. Of course, Harold. How nice. What she didn't know was that the video was going to show her something far more important than the past. It was going to show her the future, and her place, or rather, her lack of place, in it. The stage was set. The trap was ready. And all I had to do was press play. Everything was about to change. Comment below. Do you think Harold went too far? Or did Trina deserve this? Let's hear your thoughts. The old projector sat on the shelf in my study, dusty and forgotten. I hadn't used it in years. But Margaret's old home videos were still there, stored in boxes under the stairs. I pulled them out that afternoon and rifled through them. Found the one from Christmas 1995. Evan was 8 years old, opening presents with that pure joy only kids can have. Margaret was laughing in the background, her voice strong and alive in a way that made my chest hurt. I set up the projector carefully, hooked it up to the television, made sure the tape played perfectly, and then I made a copy of Calvin's video, the one showing the deed transfer, the lifetime tenancy clause, the proof that the sale was final and untouchable. I spliced it right into the recording, right after the old memories, right when their guard would be down. By the time they arrived that evening, everything was ready. The projector was set. The video was queued up. My heart was steady, but my hands were shaking. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. They came in the same way they always did. Trina shaking off her coat like she was already thinking about leaving. Evan looking guilty about something. Mila running straight to me with a hug that made everything else fade away for just a second. I made small talk, offered them drinks, asked Mila about school, acted like everything was normal. Acting was easier than I expected. Maybe because I'd been acting for months, pretending I didn't know what they were planning. Pretending I was just a helpless old man waiting for them to decide my fate. After dinner, after the plates were cleared, I stood up and smiled. My voice was calm, steady, like I'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. Before we call it a night, I want to show you something special, I said. Margaret's old Christmas video. I found it going through some boxes. Thought we could all relive some good memories together. Trina sighed. Actually sighed. Like watching my dead wife on video was an inconvenience. Sure, Harold. One last sentimental trip. Evan frowned. Dad, you okay? You seem different. Never better, I said. And I meant it. I felt lighter than I had in months. Like I'd finally stopped running from something and started running toward it instead. Mila climbed up into the recliner beside me. She grabbed my hand. She always did when we watched movies together. Like she was anchoring herself to me. The video started. The old projector hummed to life, and suddenly Margaret was there. On the wall. Bigger than life. Laughing. It was December 1995, and she was wearing that red sweater she loved, the one with the snowflakes on it. Evan was tearing through wrapping paper. The tree was glowing in the background. Look at your mother, I said softly to Evan. Look at how happy she was. Evan watched. For a moment, his face softened. He remembered. He remembered when this family meant something. When holidays were about love instead of transactions. The video played on. Christmas morning. Margaret making breakfast. Evan and his friends playing in the snow. Margaret's voice, laughing, always laughing. It was like having her back in the room with us. And then the video cut to black. Trina shifted in her seat. Is that? One more thing, I said quietly. The screen flickered back to life. But this time it wasn't Margaret. It was Calvin's office. It was me, sitting in a leather chair, dated 2 weeks prior. Calvin was across from me, holding documents. "Mr. Quinn," Calvin's voice came through the speakers. "You understand that upon completion of this sale, the house legally transfers ownership to my investment group. The buyers will post a sold sign by December 26th. I watched Trina's face. Watched the color drain from it like someone had pulled a plug. "And," Calvin continued on the video, "as per the agreement, Mr. Quinn retains life tenancy. No one can remove him without legal consent and his approval. He's protected." The room was completely silent. Even Mila had stopped moving. Trina's voice was small when she finally spoke. What is this?" I turned to face them. Mila was still holding my hand, but now she was looking up at me like she was trying to figure out if I was the good guy or the bad guy in this story. "I sold the house," I said simply, "to a legitimate investment group. The sale is finalized. The deed is transferred. And I have a lifetime tenancy agreement that no lawyer in the world can break. You wanted me out of here? You wanted to erase me? Well, now you're the ones who don't belong." Evan stood up slowly. His face was pale. "Dad, this isn't, you can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. And I did. Trina stood too, but her legs looked unsteady. "You sold the house? You actually sold our house?" "My house," I corrected. "And it was never yours to begin with." Before anyone could say another word, there was a knock at the door. I'd arranged this with Calvin earlier. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the porch, holding papers. "We're looking for Evan and Trina," one of them said. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. This was really happening. This was actually real. "That's us," Evan said, confused. "What's this about?" "We're here to enforce a restraining order," the officer said. "You have no legal right to this property. You need to leave immediately." Trina's face went white. "A restraining order? Harold, did you—" "Merry Christmas," I said quietly. They left that night with their bags. Trina was furious, her voice sharp and cutting as she grabbed Mila's hand. Evan looked like a man who just realized his entire future had crumbled in the span of 30 minutes. But Mila was the one that broke me. She looked back at me as her mother dragged her toward the door, confusion and fear in those big eyes. She didn't understand. She couldn't possibly understand why her grandfather had just destroyed her family's plans. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell her that this was about dignity, about standing up for yourself, about not letting people erase you just because it's convenient for them. But she was only 10 years old, and all she could see was that Grandpa had done something that made her parents angry. As they drove away, I stood on the porch in the cold night air. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did Harold do the right thing? Let's inspire others with your perspective. By morning, the sold sign was on the lawn. Bright red letters against white wood. I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching it catch the early light. It looked like a beacon, like a flag planted on conquered territory. Except I didn't feel like a conqueror. I felt like someone who'd won a battle but lost something more important in the process. The house was mine again. Legally, completely, irrevocably mine. For the rest of my life. I could stay here until I died, and nobody could take that away from me. I'd protected Margaret's memory. I'd protected my dignity. I'd made sure that Evan and Trina couldn't just erase me and turn my life into a real estate transaction. So why did it feel like I'd lost everything? I made breakfast, just eggs and toast, nothing fancy. Margaret's kitchen suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too much like a monument to a life that wasn't coming back. I sat at the table where we'd spent countless mornings together, where we'd talked about our dreams, and I ate my eggs alone. Around 10 o'clock, Trina's car drove slowly past the house. I saw it from the window. She was driving alone, staring at the sold sign like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Her face was a mask of shock and fury, and something else I couldn't quite name. Disbelief, maybe. Realizing that her plan had failed so completely. I waved from the window, smiled, and I watched her drive away faster than she'd come. That afternoon, I got a call from Calvin. His voice was professional but kind. "Harold, I wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I wanted to tell him I felt great, that I'd won, that justice had been served. Instead, I found myself saying, "I'm okay, just processing." "That's normal," he said. "You just appended your family structure. Give yourself time." "I keep thinking about Mila," I admitted. She looked at me like I was the villain. "Maybe right now you are," Calvin said. And he wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. "But years from now, she'll understand. She'll understand that you refused to be erased. That you stood up for yourself. That's worth something." After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day cleaning. Not because the house was dirty, but because I needed something to do. I needed to move, to work, to keep my hands busy so my mind couldn't spiral into doubt. I cleaned out Margaret's closet. That's something I'd been avoiding for 5 years. Her clothes still hung there, the dresses she'd worn to church, the sweater she'd loved, the coat she'd had on the last day she was alive. I held each piece to my face and breathed in, trying to find traces of her perfume, her presence, her life. But it was all gone. All I was left with was the fabric and the memories. That evening, I made dinner for one. A small portion of soup. A single slice of bread. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at Margaret's empty chair across from me. For 5 years, I'd been sitting alone. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like a punishment instead of just a reality I'd learned to live with. I thought about Evan. My son. We hadn't spoken since that night. He hadn't called. I hadn't called him. There was a chasm between us now, and I wasn't sure how to bridge it. Maybe we never would. And Mila. My granddaughter. My little star. Was she at home, confused and angry, wondering why Grandpa had done something so terrible? Was she asking her mother why she couldn't see me anymore? That thought sat heavy in my chest. I went to bed early that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle around me. This was mine. This place. This life. I'd fought for it and won. But winning had cost me more than I'd anticipated. What would you have done differently? Comment your thoughts and share this story. Subscribe to stay with Harold's journey as it unfolds. 6 weeks passed. 6 weeks of silence. 6 weeks of a house that was too big and too quiet and too full of ghosts. I stopped counting the days somewhere around day 35. After that, they all felt the same. I'd wake up early. I'd make coffee. I'd sit at the kitchen table and read the newspaper, even though most of it didn't interest me. Then I'd move through the day like I was wading through water. Slow. Heavy. Like every movement required deliberate effort. Some mornings, I'd stand in Margaret's garden. She'd loved flowers, roses, mostly, and these little purple things she called violets. The garden had gone wild without her care. But I found that I didn't want to cut it back. Didn't want to prune or organize or control it. It was beautiful in its wildness. It reminded me that things didn't have to be perfect to be valuable. One afternoon, I drove past the church where Margaret and I had gotten married. I didn't go inside. I just sat in the parking lot and remembered what it felt like to love someone that completely. To build a life with someone and know, with absolute certainty, that you'd never find anyone else quite like them. That's what hurt the most. Not that I'd lost Evan. Not even that I'd probably lost Mila. What hurt was that I'd made my stand for a house. For a building. For something that Margaret wouldn't have cared about if the alternative was losing her family. I could almost hear her voice. Harold, it's just a house. Your family is your life. But I'd been so focused on protecting the house, on protecting her memory by keeping it exactly as it was, that I'd destroyed what might have mattered more. One night, I couldn't sleep. It was around 2 in the morning, and I found myself standing in front of Margaret's closet again. I pulled out that sweater with the snowflakes. The one from the video. The one that held the last good Christmas I could remember. I sat on the edge of the bed and I cried. I cried for Margaret. I cried for Evan, my weak but well-meaning son. I cried for Mila, who was caught in the middle of adult mistakes. And I cried for myself, for the old man I'd become, so afraid of being erased that I'd erased everyone else first. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to just sit in this house and rot. I wasn't going to let bitterness become my entire life. I had time left on this earth, and I'd be damned if I was going to spend it alone. I started getting involved in the community. I volunteered at the local food bank. I started teaching woodworking classes at the community center, something I hadn't done in years. I figured maybe I could pass on some skills, maybe make a difference in someone else's life. Maybe create some positive memories instead of just living in old ones. The volunteers at the food bank were mostly young people. College kids and retirees and single mothers trying to make ends meet. There was this one kid, couldn't have been more than 19, who didn't know the first thing about organizing a shelf. I showed him how to stack canned goods by date, how to make sure nothing got damaged or wasted. Why does it matter so much? He asked me one day. I thought about that question for a long moment. Because what you do matters, I told him. Even if it's small. Even if it seems insignificant. The way you treat people. The care you put into things. That's what defines you. He nodded like he was really listening. Like what I was saying meant something. That felt good. That felt like maybe I was doing something right. In the evenings, I'd go back to the empty house and it didn't feel quite as empty anymore. I'd lived a full day. I'd helped people. I'd made a small difference in the world. It wasn't the same as having family around, but it was something. I'd walk past Mila's school sometimes. I wouldn't go inside or try to talk to her. That wouldn't have been fair to her or to Evan. But sometimes I'd see her on the playground during recess, and I'd watch her for a minute. She seemed happy. She was playing with other kids, laughing, being a normal 10-year-old girl. Maybe she'd already moved past that night. Maybe she'd already forgotten that her grandfather was the bad guy in the story. Part of me hoped she had. But part of me hoped that someday, when she was older, she'd understand. That she'd realize that sometimes standing up for yourself means standing alone. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to be erased, even if the cost is higher than you anticipated. I didn't know if that was wisdom or just justification. But I was learning to live with the uncertainty. Tell us in the comments, would you forgive Harold if you were Evan? Subscribe to continue watching as the story reaches its turning point. Spring came. Flowers bloomed. The world turned green again, and I felt something shift inside me. Not happiness, exactly, but maybe acceptance. The understanding that life moves forward whether you're ready or not. It had been 4 months since that Christmas night. 4 months of silence. 4 months of living in a house that was legally mine but felt like someone else's life. I'd gotten into a routine by then. Mornings at the food bank or the woodworking classes. Afternoons in Margaret's garden, now being carefully restored to something that resembled what it used to be. Evenings at home, reading or watching old movies or just sitting on the porch and thinking about nothing in particular. I didn't expect to hear from Evan. That ship had sailed. That bridge had burned. I'd made my choice, and he'd made his. We were living in separate worlds now, and I'd come to accept that. But then one day in late April, a letter arrived. The envelope was thick, expensive-looking, handwritten. My name and address in Evan's careful printing. I recognized his handwriting immediately. It had been years since I'd seen it, but some things don't change. My hands shook as I opened it. "Dear Dad," it began. "I've started this letter probably 50 times. I've torn up 49 of them. I don't know what to say to you. I don't know how to bridge what happened between us. But I think I finally understand why you did what you did." I had to sit down to keep reading. He went on to explain that he'd been doing a lot of thinking. That he'd realized, too late, how much he'd let Trina manipulate him. How he'd gotten so caught up in financial planning and property values that he'd lost sight of what actually mattered. How watching his father refuse to be erased had somehow woken him up to his own life being erased. "Trina and I are getting divorced," he wrote. "I don't expect you to celebrate that. But I want you to know that I'm taking full custody of Mila. And more than that, I'm seeing her clearly now. I'm seeing how wrong I was to let her be part of that plan. To let her think it was normal to treat people like investments instead of family." I read that part 3 times. Full custody. Mila was going to be with him. Really with him. Not as an afterthought while Trina made plans, but as his daughter. As the person who mattered most. "The house," he continued. "It was never about the money for me. It was about making things easier. About simplifying my life. But in trying to simplify things, I made them infinitely more complicated. I lost my father. I almost lost my sense of who I am as a person. And I hurt a little girl who doesn't deserve to be hurt." The letter went on for several pages. Evan's words were raw and honest in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He didn't ask for his inheritance back or for me to reconsider the sale. He just wanted me to know that I'd been right. That standing up for yourself matters. That refusing to be erased by people who are supposed to love you is the most important thing you can do. At the very end, he wrote, "I'm not asking for a relationship right now. I understand that takes time. But I want you to know that Mila has been asking about you. She doesn't understand what happened. She just knows that Grandpa isn't in her life anymore. When you're ready, I think she'd like to hear from you. On your terms. At your pace. No pressure from me. Just, if you're willing." I sat in my kitchen, holding that letter, and I cried. Not sad tears this time. Not angry tears. Just tears, the kind that come when something inside you breaks open and starts to heal at the same time. That afternoon, I did something I'd been afraid to do for months. I called Calvin. "I want to talk about modifying the sale agreement," I told him. "Is there any way to add Evan and Mila to the lifetime tenancy clause? To give them security here too, if they want it?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Harold," Calvin said carefully, "are you sure? You don't owe them anything." "No," I agreed. "I don't. But I want to. I want Mila to know that this house isn't just my sanctuary. It's hers too. When she's ready." Calvin was quiet for another moment. Then, "Okay. Let me look into what's legally possible." "But Harold, that's a beautiful thing to do." I spent the next few days working in Margaret's garden. I pruned the roses back to health. I planted new flowers, some of the same ones she used to love, and some new varieties I thought she might have enjoyed. I worked with my hands, feeling the earth, grounding myself in something real and alive. And I thought about forgiveness. Not forgiveness in the sense of saying what happened was okay, but forgiveness in the sense of recognizing that everyone was doing the best they could with the tools they had. That Evan was weak but not bad. That Trina was greedy but not evil. That I was right to protect myself, but maybe also wrong to do it in a way that hurt innocent people. It wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. But it was real. 3 days later, I sat down and wrote a letter back to Evan. I didn't make excuses. I didn't ask for things I didn't deserve. I just told him the truth, that I loved him, that I was proud of him for waking up, that I understood we had hurt each other, and that I was willing to try again if he was. I asked him to bring Mila to visit. I told him that there was a garden she might like to see. That I'd learned something about letting things grow wild before you try to control them. And I told him that this house, Margaret's house, my house, was also his house and his daughter's house, if they wanted it to be. That there was room here for all of us. That some things were worth protecting, but family was worth more. I mailed the letter the next morning. Then I waited. What do you think will happen when Mila comes back? Comment your predictions. Subscribe now to see how this family finds their way back to each other. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon in May, there was a knock on my door. I'd been working in the garden. My hands were dirty, my back was sore, and I had dirt under my fingernails. I almost didn't answer. I almost said to myself, "Not now. I'm not ready." But I thought about what Margaret always said, the readiest time to do something is rarely the best time. The best time is when you do it anyway. I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened the door. It was Evan. And behind him, holding his hand with a cautious grip, was Mila. She was taller than I remembered. She'd grown in the months we'd been apart. Her hair was longer. She looked like she was trying to be brave about something, the way kids do when adults have told them they're about to experience something important. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at them. My son. My granddaughter. The people I'd hurt and been hurt by. The people I'd learned to live without and had somehow learned I couldn't live without. "Hi, Dad," Evan said quietly. "Hello, Grandpa," Mila said, her voice small and uncertain. I stepped back from the doorway. "Come in, please." They came inside, and the house suddenly didn't feel quite so empty anymore. It felt like maybe it was starting to remember what it was supposed to be. A home. Not a monument or a symbol or a prize to be won. Just a home where people who loved each other could exist together. We sat in the living room. There was awkward silence at first, the kind that happens when people have a lot to say but don't know how to start saying it. Then Mila looked around and said, "Grandpa, did you change things?" "A little," I admitted. "Come see." I showed them the garden. I showed them the roses that were finally blooming again. I showed them the new flowers I'd planted. I showed them the corner where Margaret used to sit in the mornings with her coffee. "I remember this," Mila said, pointing to the garden bench. "Grandma Margaret sat here. I remember her reading a book." My heart almost burst. "Yes," I said. "She did. We spent the afternoon together. We made lunch. Simple things, nothing fancy. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd eaten alone for so many months, and it felt different now. It felt like it was supposed to feel. Like it was full of life and possibility instead of absence and regret." Evan told me about the divorce. He told me about custody arrangements and moving forward and trying to be a better father. He told me that Mila had been asking about me, that she'd wanted to come back, that he'd been scared I wouldn't want to see them. "I always want to see you," I told him. "Both of you. I made mistakes. I made them in the name of protecting something I loved. But I forgot that protecting something doesn't mean destroying everything else in the process." Evan looked down at his plate. "I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it. I know. I said. And I'm sorry too. For being harsh. For not finding a better way. We didn't solve everything that afternoon. We didn't erase the months of silence or the hurt we'd caused each other. But we started something. We started talking. We started remembering that we were family. That blood and love and history mattered more than who was right or who was wrong. Before they left, I walked them to the door. Mila turned back and hugged me. It was a real hug this time. Not confused or hesitant. Just a granddaughter hugging her grandfather. Can we come back? She asked. Every weekend if you want to, I told her. Even when you're mad? She asked, and I realized she was asking about more than just this weekend. Especially when I'm mad, I said. That's when family matters most. After they left, I stood on the porch and looked at the house. The sold sign was still there, but it didn't bother me anymore. Let it say what it wanted to say. Let people know that this place had changed hands. The truth was simpler and more complicated than that. The truth was that this house had always belonged to the people who lived in it with love. Margaret and me. Evan and Mila. Maybe, eventually, others. I went back inside and sat in Margaret's garden, both in the garden outside and in the garden inside my heart, the one where I'd planted all my hopes and dreams and watched them grow wild before learning to tend them again. I thought about the measure of a man. Not what he gives away. Not what he protects. But what he refuses to let others steal, and what he chooses to give freely once he's learned the difference. I'd learned that difference the hard way. But I'd learned it. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth the cost. The house was quiet again when night fell. But it wasn't an empty quiet anymore. It was a quiet filled with possibility. With healing. With the knowledge that some bridges, even ones that seem completely burned, can be rebuilt if both people are willing to try. I sat in my recliner, Margaret's recliner, really, and I looked at that crooked Christmas tree that Mila had drawn. The one that still sat in my desk drawer where I'd kept it all these months. I looked at it and I smiled. We did it, Margaret, I whispered to the empty room. We kept the house. And we kept the family. Somehow, we did both. Outside, the wind moved through the roses. The garden swayed in the darkness. And inside, an old man sat with his memories and his hope, finally at peace with how he'd fought, why he'd fought, and what he'd learned about the real meaning of home. It was never about the building. It was always about the love inside it. And love, real love, has a way of surviving even the worst mistakes we make in its name. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did Harold make the right choices? What would you have done differently? Subscribe and turn on notifications for more powerful stories about family, dignity, and the courage it takes to stand up for yourself. Let's build this community together. Your voice matters. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.